February 14th, 1933. Bumpy Johnson was facing impossible odds. He was alone, surrounded by 12 men sent by Dutch Schultz, the most feared crime boss in New York at the time. These weren't ordinary street figures. They were experienced operators, men whose reputations were known in whispers, even among police. That night, they trapped Bumpy in the basement of a Harlem club. No witnesses, one narrow exit, no easy escape. Bumpy was only 27 years old and still rising in the underworld. Dutch Schultz, on the other hand, was already at the top. Most people assumed this would end one way, quietly and permanently. But Bumpy Johnson had never followed anyone else's rules. 90 minutes later, only one man walked out of that basement, and the message he carried back left Dutch Schultz visibly shaken. That night marked the moment Bumpy Johnson became untouchable. To understand how this happened, you first have to understand Harlem in 1933. The Harlem Renaissance had faded. The Great Depression had taken hold. Jobs were scarce, money was tighter, and people were desperate. When desperation sets in, people look for chance, small bets, big dreams. The illegal numbers game became the backbone of Harlem's economy. A few cents could turn into real money. For families barely surviving, it wasn't gambling, it was hope. Dutch Schultz noticed that hope flowing through Harlem. A businessman from the Bronx, he had built his fortune during Prohibition, but with alcohol becoming legal again, his empire was at risk. He needed a new source of income, and Harlem's numbers game looked like the perfect replacement. He wanted control of all of it. There was just one problem. Harlem already had leadership. Madame Stephanie St. Clair ran the numbers operation, and her chief protector was Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't like others in his role. He wasn't reckless or loud. He was thoughtful, educated himself while incarcerated, and believed respect mattered more than fear. When workers were robbed, he recovered their losses. When corrupt officials targeted local businesses, he found ways to stop them, sometimes without force, sometimes by exposing misconduct. He refused to submit to outside control. In January 1933, Dutch Schultz sent representatives to Harlem. They met with Madame St. Clair and made their position clear: cooperate, pay up, or face consequences. Madame St. Clair refused without hesitation. When they tried to intimidate Bumpy, he didn't argue or threaten. He simply stared. It was enough. The message went back to Dutch. And Dutch, who was not used to being refused, decided to make an example. He wanted Bumpy removed in a way that would send a warning to everyone else. Valentine's Day, 1933. Bumpy received word that something was about to happen at one of Harlem's key operations. He went alone to investigate. Whether that was a mistake or a calculated move depends on who you ask. The basement wasn't part of the famous Cotton Club known to outsiders. This was a local after-hours space where real business was handled. The room was tight, dimly lit, filled with storage crates and tables. Only one staircase led back out. At 4:32 a.m., Bumpy walked downstairs. That's when the room changed. 12 men stepped forward from the shadows. No shouting, no rush. Just quiet confidence. One of them spoke, passing along a message from Dutch. Bumpy stayed calm. He counted them slowly, then asked a simple question that caught everyone off guard. "That's all?" The confidence in his voice caused hesitation, not fear, doubt. Bumpy didn't posture, he didn't bluff. He understood something few people did. Moments like this have a rhythm. Whoever controls that rhythm controls the outcome. When he warned them they were making a mistake, they assumed he meant backup was coming. Nothing happened. Silence stretched. And that silence changed everything. because what those men didn't fully understand was that Bumpy Johnson had been preparing for moments like this since childhood. He had survived the streets, confinement, and conflict long before that night, and he knew when to speak and when to wait. That night wasn't about strength alone, it was about timing, and history remembers what followed.
Bumpy moved. What happened next was never fully agreed upon. The only man who walked away from that basement later gave a statement, but it was scattered and unclear. Fear has a way of breaking memory into pieces. Still, certain details remained consistent. Bumpy didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the light. One sudden strike sent the hanging bulb crashing to the floor. The room dropped into total darkness. In an instant, control disappeared. Confusion took over. Loud noises echoed as men reacted without thinking, aiming at sounds instead of targets. Someone shouted to stop, to hold steady, but panic ignores commands. In that darkness, the balance shifted. Bumpy knew that basement well. He had spent countless hours there. Cards, conversations, quiet deals. He knew where every crate stood, where the tables were placed, how far the walls were. The others didn't. What followed happened fast. You could hear people stumbling. Something heavy hit the floor. Voices overlapped. Movements collided. The chaos fed itself. Some were injured by their own side in the confusion. Others were overwhelmed before they understood what was happening. One man tried to organize an escape, calling everyone toward the stairs, but by then the situation had already slipped away. The entire encounter lasted only a few minutes. It felt far longer to those inside. Then, silence. When someone upstairs finally opened the basement door and light poured back down the steps, the scene was shocking. 11 men were down, some unconscious, some injured, all unable to continue. The room looked like the aftermath of a storm. One man remained upright, sitting against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. His breathing was rapid, his grip locked tight around what he was holding. He was the only one still conscious. Bumpy was gone. The survivor dragged himself up the stairs, step by step. Every movement was painful. It took him a long time to reach the street, where morning light had begun to break through. He managed to flag down a cab and gave an address through clenched teeth. Later that morning, he stumbled into Dutch Schultz's club in the Bronx. Dutch was having breakfast, reading the paper. When he looked up and saw the condition of the man standing in front of him, the room went silent. Dutch asked a single question. There was no immediate answer. Finally, the man whispered the truth. Everyone else was down. Dutch stood slowly. He asked again, quieter this time, "Why are you here?" The answer changed the room. "He let me go," the man said. "He said I was supposed to bring you something." Hands tensed, eyes locked in. The survivor reached into his jacket and pulled out a single playing card, stained and worn. He placed it on the table. The message was simple. Harlem was not open for takeover, and if more people were sent, more cards would follow. Dutch stared at the card for a long time. The room waited. Everyone expected orders, retaliation, escalation. Instead, Dutch gave a short, dry smile. Not amusement, acceptance. He asked a question no one expected. "Do you know what it costs to fight someone who isn't afraid of the outcome? Someone who's disciplined, supported, and prepared to lose everything?" No one answered. Dutch destroyed the card and made his decision. Harlem was no longer worth the price. The announcement stunned everyone present. Dutch Schultz had built his reputation on never stepping back, yet this time he did, because he understood something important. Some people aren't controlled by threats. They can't be pressured. You either remove them entirely or you leave them alone. Years later, a reporter asked an old employee of the club what really happened that night.
The man smiled and said, "The truth?" He paused. Bumpy wasn't actually alone.
The night Bumpy Johnson became untouchable. February 14th, 1933. Valentine's Day. While most of New York slept, a 27-year-old man walked into a basement in Harlem, alone. By sunrise, only one of 12 men would walk back out. And after that night, Harlem would never be the same. Bumpy Johnson was outnumbered 12-1. The men waiting for him weren't amateurs. They were sent by Dutch Schultz, the most feared crime boss in New York. Their names were known in whispers. Some of them weren't even on police records. The plan was simple. Trap Bumpy underground. No witnesses, no escape. Everyone expected the same ending. They were wrong. To understand why, you need to understand Harlem in 1933. The Harlem Renaissance was over. The Great Depression had crushed the city. Jobs were disappearing. Families were barely surviving. And when people are desperate, they look for chance. That chance came through the numbers game, an illegal lottery that ran through Harlem like a heartbeat. A few coins could turn into real money. For people earning almost nothing, it wasn't gambling, it was hope. And hope in Harlem was valuable. Dutch Schultz saw that value. He had made millions during Prohibition, but alcohol was becoming legal again. His empire was shrinking. He needed something new. So he looked south. Harlem was full of money, moving fast, largely unprotected, or so he thought. What Dutch didn't account for was that Harlem already had leadership. Madame Stephanie St. Clair controlled the numbers operation, and standing beside her was her chief enforcer, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He didn't rely on fear alone. He educated himself, read constantly, and understood people. In Harlem, respect wasn't taken by force. It was earned through loyalty. When workers were robbed, Bumpy recovered their money. When corrupt officials targeted local businesses, Bumpy shut it down, sometimes quietly, sometimes publicly. He didn't rule through chaos, he ruled through order. And he refused to bow to outsiders. In January of 1933, Dutch Schultz sent representatives to Harlem. They met with Madame St. Clair in her own club. Their message was blunt: cooperate, pay tribute, or face consequences. She refused. When they turned to Bumpy for pressure, he didn't argue, he didn't threaten, he simply stared at them. The kind of stare that made men rethink their confidence. The message went back to Dutch, and Dutch Schultz had never been told no, especially not from a black woman and her protector. So he made a decision. He wouldn't negotiate. He would make an example. He wanted Bumpy removed in a way that would terrify everyone else. Public, brutal, final. Valentine's Day. Bumpy received a tip that something was about to happen at one of Harlem's counting houses. He went to check it himself, alone. Some say it was a mistake. Others believe Bumpy knew exactly what he was walking into. The basement wasn't part of the famous Cotton Club tourists knew. This was the real after-hour spot, where deals were made, money moved, and disputes settled. The room was tight, dim, crates stacked along the walls, one narrow staircase leading out. At 4:32 a.m., Bumpy walked down those stairs. The light bulb swayed gently overhead. Then the shadows moved. 12 men stepped forward. No shouting, no rush, just quiet confidence. One of them spoke, a message from Dutch Schultz. Bumpy stood still, hands at his sides, calm. He slowly counted the men in front of him. Then he asked one question. "That's all?" The room shifted. Not fear, hesitation. Bumpy Johnson didn't bluff. If he spoke,
He meant it. He understood something most men never learned. Moments like this have a rhythm. Whoever controls that rhythm controls the outcome. One of the men warned him, "Last chance." Bumpy tilted his head slightly. "You're making a mistake." They laughed. "You're about to find out," he replied. And then he moved. Bumpy didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the light. One sharp strike sent the bulb crashing. Darkness swallowed the room. Instant chaos. Men reacted on instinct. Loud noises echoed. Someone shouted orders, but panic doesn't follow instructions. In the darkness, control vanished. Bumpy knew that basement, every crate, every table, every corner. The others didn't. Sounds collided. Footsteps stumbled. Someone fell. Another voice cried out. Confusion fed itself. Some were injured by their own side in the panic. The attempt to escape came too late. The entire encounter lasted only minutes, but for the men inside, it felt endless. Then, silence. When the basement door was finally opened from above, light poured down the steps. What they found shocked everyone. 11 men were down, some unconscious, some injured, none able to continue. One man remained sitting against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, barely breathing. Bumpy was gone. The survivor crawled up the stairs, step by step, every movement hurt. By the time he reached the street, the sun was coming up. He flagged down a cab and gave an address through clenched teeth. Later that morning, he stumbled into Dutch Schultz's club in the Bronx. Dutch was having breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, newspaper. When he looked up and saw the condition of the man standing before him, the room went silent. Where are the others? The answer took time. All of them. Down. Dutch stood slowly. Why are you here? He let me live. The room froze. He said I was supposed to bring you something. The survivor reached into his jacket and placed a single playing card on the table, worn, stained, unmistakable. A message. Harlem was not for sale. And if more men were sent, more cards would follow. Dutch stared at the card for a long time. Everyone waited for orders, retaliation, war. Instead, Dutch smiled, not with joy, but understanding. Do you know what it costs to fight someone who isn't afraid of the outcome? Someone who's smarter than you? Someone with an entire neighborhood behind him? No one answered. Dutch destroyed the card. We're done in Harlem. And just like that, it ended. After that night, Dutch Schultz never sent another man north. Bumpy Johnson became the undisputed leader of Harlem. For the next 35 years, he protected it, not through chaos, but through strategy, intelligence, and a strict personal code. That ace of spades was framed and kept as a reminder. Respect is never given, it's taken. February 14th, 1933. 12 men walked into a basement. 1 walked out. And Harlem changed forever. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We're telling the stories history left behind, the moments that built legends. Drop a like if you believe Bumpy Johnson was the smartest man Harlem ever produced. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Dutch Schultz? More legendary stories are coming next. Don't miss them.